Chapter 19. The Ceremony. Precious power, it's over. They know we've been spying on them, and now we're gonna die. Oh, good, the woman squealed. Glad you're down here. Could one of you be a dear and fetch me a nice cold glass of water? I glanced at Stasha, her face expressionless, trying not to look scared or shocked, I took it. I attempted to mirror her look. Sure, I stuttered. The woman smiled and clapped her hands. Fabulous. Make sure there's plenty of ice, love. Ice? Where in Middleton could I get ice? It was almost winter, but not quite yet. Are you sure that's such a good idea? Asked the man who was also watching one of the massive squares. Amazing how deep his voice was. Even though I'd hit puberty, mine still wasn't that low. Isn't it almost time for... All the grown-ups glanced at their priceless gold watches. See, said the man who just spoke. Told you it was about time for the ceremony. Ceremony? The woman let out a high, dainty chuckle. So it is. She looked at Stasha and me. Never mind, loves. We're off for the ceremony. She looked back toward the other grown-ups, whose gazes were still stuck to the giant squares. Come on, guys, away from the TVs. TVs? Must have been what those squares were called. The two men holding the objects with wires kept clicking buttons on them. Come on, you two, the woman said. You can finish your silly video game when we get back. The battling creatures on the TV froze, like the images trapped in the camera in my pocket. One of the beastly fighters hovered in midair with a kick aimed toward the other. Both the men put down their wired devices, glum expressions on their faces, and climbed to their feet. Video game. That must have been the type of game they were playing. That'd explain why the rulers didn't call it by its real name on the VO list. Would have been obvious to everybody in Middleton it was just some stupid game, not something that'd help the rulers rediscover power like they said. My stomach acid churned again. The worthless pieces of horse crap. Please do be a dear and fetch me a glass after the ceremony, the woman said. The whole ordeal shouldn't take too long. I nodded more vigorously than I meant to. No problem. That's why we're here. Stasha smiled and wrapped an arm around my shoulder. Nice touch, Stasha. Don't call it an ordeal, Stona, the man in the blue suit said with a scowl. Stona? A ruler 2 generations back, if I remembered right from my studies. It's a very special and very important occasion. You remember when it was our day, don't you? The woman rolled her eyes. Of course I do, Hillard. Hillard? From the same generation as Stona. How could I forget? Now, come on. We certainly don't want to be late. You remember what happened to poor dear Sturge that one time he was late to a family meeting? The two adults who were just watching their TVs each immediately picked up a small, long, rectangular object on the couch and clicked a button on it. The images on those TVs froze, too. Then all the grown-ups went up the stairs and the basement door thudded shut. I clapped my hands to my head. We blew our chance. Perhaps we should wait until they return. It appears as though they plan to continue their entertainment as soon as the ceremony ends. We don't have the time. Somebody could find those 2 guards we knocked out any second. We gotta find a way to get to that ceremony so we can get evidence of the grown-ups. Come on, let's head upstairs. But first I froze an image of the basement with all its TVs. It wouldn't convince anyone the VOs were being used for entertainment, but who knew if it'd come in handy. I also froze a close-up image of a glass bottle on the table. Sealed bottles were always worth a ton of prestige points. That was one thing that was always constant on the ruler's absurd VO list. I always wondered what the bottle's content tasted like. Had to be pretty good considering they came from the old world. This bottle had obviously just been drunk though, because of the liquid on the rim. Guess the rulers got to drink all the bottles, so this image would be good evidence the rulers just didn't preserve them like they said they did. A fly crawled up along the inside of the bottle, reached the opening, and flew out. Stasha and I climbed the stairs. It was tougher going up than down with my injured foot, but I did okay. We entered the incredible hallway and followed the echo of voices. We moved as fast as we could, so we didn't lose them in the massive manor. After we wound through a couple more beautiful hallways, staying a few yards behind the grown-ups, we approached the entrance room. I felt my jaw drop so far, I was surprised it didn't crack on the glossy marble floor. The ceiling rose up about 30 feet. Straight ahead lay a pair of large double brass doors. One of them stood open, and the grown-ups went through the opening. 2 servants in suits, a short girl and a pudgy boy, stood to the left and right of the doors. On either side of each door rose a massive marble staircase that twirled up and connected to a large circular balcony that overlooked the magnificent area. A huge gold chandelier hung from the ceiling in the center of the room. I'd never seen one before, but I'd seen drawings of them when I'd been trained as a VO hunter in my nurture faction. Always worth a gazillion prestige points, though they usually hung in the entrance room of a house, like this one, so the chances were all the ones in Middleton had been found already. "Impeccable," Stasha murmured, her gaze turned up at the chandelier. "True, but how are we going to get into the ceremony room?" I nodded toward where the 2 kids in suits stood, guns and holsters at their waists. No doubt something real important was about to go down in there. She ripped her gaze away from the chandelier and stroked her chin. "Good point. Well, the doors are quite tall and wide, which means the room most likely is large and has a high ceiling. In a mansion like this, perhaps there's a balcony on the 2nd floor that overlooks the room. There is one in my manor in any case. I propose we take the stairs." We headed toward the marble staircase on the left. Even though it sent stabs of pain through my foot, I tried to walk as naturally as I could, like we were just a couple of servants going about our business. "What are you doing?" the short girl by the brass doors barked in a razor-blade voice when we were within a couple of feet of the staircase. "Oh, Mother of Power." We stopped. Just going upstairs," I said. The girl screwed up her nose on her mousy face as she looked up at us, like she smelled something rotten. "Sorry, but nobody's allowed upstairs on Cure Day, at least not near the banquet hall." My heart skipped a beat. Cure Day? Yep. No doubt something big was about to happen. The skin on my arms tingled. We had to get in there. "Oh, we're merely attending to some toilets," Stasha said. "That's right," I said. "We're toilet cleaners from the East Wing. And we've been given strict instructions to have all the restrooms cleansed on the 2nd floor before the ceremony concludes," Stasha said. Nice addition. The girl sniffed, as if trying to detect more of the suspicious foul stench she'd smelled before. The pudgy boy chewed his lip and frowned. "Then why weren't we informed of this so-called bathroom cleansing?" I thought fast. "Oh, you know how the rulers are. So absorbed with all their entertainment and VOs, they totally forget things sometimes. A risk, but given how lazy the rulers in the basement seem to be, it might just work." "Especially things of such stately importance as the well-being of their bathrooms," Stasha said with a chuckle. Perfect. The girl and boy exchanged looks, and the boy shrugged. "That's true. All right, up you go, but make it quick, and don't tell anyone else about this." "Not a problem," I said, trying hard as I could to hold back a grin, but my chest turned to lead. If this worked. It was another chore for my foot to make it up the stairs. At the top, we entered another elegant hallway with a mahogany floor, and more extremely awesome paintings and VOs that lined the walls. Nobody was around, so we went through the propped open door across the hallway and entered another room with a real high ceiling. "Get down," Stasha whispered harshly, and jabbed me in the back. I knelt to the ground a bit stiffly because of the fire poker strapped to my side. I had to push it up a little, so the end of it didn't rest on the ground. It poked up through the back of my suit. What was that for? "Don't want to be detected, do you?" I looked around. We stooped on a balcony as wide as a hallway. A marble railing hugged the side of it. We crept to the edge of the railing and peeked through its gaps, down into the massive banquet hall. The balcony wrapped around the whole room a full story up. Rows of empty round tables with shiny white tablecloths crowded the floor below. Everybody in the room sat at tables at the far end. "We've got to get closer," I said. We crawled beside the balcony along the left side of the room, me behind Stasha. At the other end of the hall, we peeked through the gaps in the railing again. Right below us, 4 kids each sat at their own table. 2 girls in elaborate dresses and 2 boys in fancy tuxedos. I shuddered. Their faces and bare arms were the deepest gray color I'd ever seen on somebody. Their faces more like giant blemishes than faces. "The current rulers," Stasha murmured. A deep cold seeped into my soul. I'd forgotten the plague got worse incredibly fast within the last 2 weeks of your life, like it suddenly decided to go all out until it killed you. Probably because I always tried to shove the disturbing thought from my mind, but I guess I'd always figured if I didn't get accused of LYN, I'd do what some kids had done in the past. Ask the patrol to hang me as soon as I started to show symptoms of that horrific stage. At least, that was the one thing the rulers let you do. The current rulers faced the adults, who sat at 2 tables farther to the right. The 4 grown-ups who'd been downstairs watching TV and playing video games sat at one, 5 others at the other. Close enough to freeze a good image. A black briefcase lay on the table the 5 grown-ups sat at. Even from here I could see the gold lion insignia on the case's top, so it was the same case Stasha and I had seen at the funnel-shaped building. It lay in front of the biggest, strongest-looking man in the room. He looked even older than the adults who'd been in the basement, lots more wrinkles on his face and arms, and nothing but thin wisps of white hair jutted from his head. No way. The deep cold in my soul grew to a sub-zero temperature. "Alec," I murmured. "Come again?" Stasha asked. "That's gotta be Alec Battleux, the ancestor of the Middleton rulers." I pointed at his table. Stasha turned her head slightly and let out a tiny gasp. Alec wore a fancy white suit, the fanciest outfit in the room, with a silver tie. A large gold watch clung to his wrist, even bigger than the ones the other rulers wore. A pair of thick-framed glasses hung on his nose. I found myself grinding my teeth. He could probably get as many glasses as he wanted, something the rest of Middleton sure couldn't. The poor kids with weak vision were stuck with sending a note to the ruler's mansion requesting glasses, and they'd be pretty lucky if a manor servant even responded, or could find a pair that worked for them, since glasses were another resource that was running low these days. But not for Alec, not the filthy, wretched liar of a man who would always get whatever he pleased. "It must be him," Stasha said, "and judging by how many years ago he took over Middleton, he mustn't be a hair younger than 67. A mind-boggling thought for sure. What was it like to live that long? I couldn't even begin to imagine. One of the women at Alec's table leaned toward the hulking man and started to fold his collar over a part of his tie that was showing. Alec brushed it off with a thick arm. "It's perfectly all right," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. "But if you'll just give me a moment to make it perfect." I barely heard the woman's soft voice. Alec's face grew a light shade of red. "Positively not," he barked. "I like it this style. I recently read about it in a book." "If you say so." The woman's voice came out meek this time. She turned to look straight ahead, and the other adults at the table, all decked out in elegant dresses and tuxedos like the current rulers, shifted uneasily in their seats. "Let's freeze a couple images and get out of here," I said. "Sounds like an exceptional idea," Stasha said. As I removed the camera from my pocket, Alex stood, picked up the suitcase from the table, and stepped up to a mahogany podium. Lots of mahogany in this place, too, that rose at the far left side of the room. The 4 kids at their own tables kept looking straight ahead at the grown-ups across from them. Alec placed the briefcase onto the podium, pulled a yellow folded-up piece of paper out of his pocket, unfolded it, and looked down at it. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," he boomed in his deep, hoarse voice. "We are all gathered here for a very special occasion, an occasion that occurs only once every 16 years, for today is Cure Day." It was painful to listen to him because of how many times he paused, like he didn't quite know how to say the next word. "You know," I said, "despite how much he pauses, he sounds kind of like you." "Well, he ought to," Stasha said in a voice tinged with both bitterness and amusement, "considering he has all of Middleton's books." "The birthdays of the Battleux family's youngest generation," Alex said, "are under a week away, and as expected, the members have become drastically sick. Therefore, if each relative is not formally, a man's real deep voice came from one of the tables. Alex stamped his foot, which made a loud thud echo in the room, and his face grew a deeper shade of red than before. "I'm aware it's formally," he said in a particularly gruff voice. "Whoa, temper." He looked back down at the paper. "In any case, if each relative is not formally administered the cure to the plague, they will fully wither away and perish." While he'd been speaking, I'd zoomed in as far as I could on the camera and made sure the flashing light was off. I froze a couple of images. So that was what Cure Day was. The day the current rulers of Middleton, the youngest members of the Badalux family, received the cure to the plague so they could grow old in their massive, elegant mansion full of books, precious VOs, and endless entertainment. Even as I froze images, my fingers twitched with rage. Alec picked up the suitcase and placed it in front of the 4 tables where each kid sat. He continued to look down at the paper in his other hand. Zoomed in, I could see how hard he squinted, like he had to work real hard to read it.
The recipients, these 4 fine boys and girls before me, know what it's like to live while the plague feverishly eats away at them.
Even as I froze images, I tried to look away from the current ruler's hideous blotches for faces, but couldn't.
They've seen their own skin grow a mottled deep gray over the years. They felt their body's strength and
vivacity, said the woman. He stamped his foot again, harder this time, and the sound echoed in the banquet hall.
Yes, I know.
It seemed everybody in the room stiffened in their seats, including Stasha and me. If someone corrected him one more time, I wouldn't be surprised if he exploded and spewed blood and shreds of skin all over the room.
Like I was saying.
Alex shifted his focus back to the paper again.
They felt their bodies strength and vivacity slowly wither away until they feel like a mere shell of their former selves, especially within the last couple weeks or so.
He appears to have trouble reading, Stasha whispered. You're telling me. Kind of weird considering he has all of Middleton's books.
Now,
Alec continued, gaze still glued to the paper,
with nearly 17 years of hard-earned appreciation of the plague's wrath, they qualify to take the cure, so that they may grow old with strong, healthy bodies like their Badalux relatives. But before we administer the cure, it is imperative the recipients carry out the Cure Day ritual of reciting the 4 heroic deeds of myself, the great and wise Alec Badalux.
When he said the word wise, his grin seemed to take up his whole corrupted face.
After all, without me, they would never receive such a truly magnificent gift, nor would they have such a stately manner with such precious books to grow their minds, or such exquisite VOs with which to be ceaselessly entertained.
I froze a couple more images and stuffed the camera into my pocket. Okay, let's go. Stasha gripped my arm. Hold on a moment. This is the perfect opportunity to catch a couple of minutes worth of evidence rather than a few more images. Huh? You sure? Now that we've got proof of the grown-ups stored in this thing, I say we get out of here. Believe me, there's nothing I'd rather do more at the moment, but I feel we're on the verge of even more compelling evidence. There's an excellent chance Alec or the current rulers will presently divulge even more information about the ruler's corruptness. I'd say it's worth just one moment longer. Even though every speck of my being wanted to race as fast as I could back to the garage, jump in my faction's transport, and burst out of there, I had the feeling she was right. The ceremony seemed to be reaching a climax, and with all the convincing proof we could ever ask for. I removed the camera from my pocket again, aimed it down at Alec and the current rulers, and pushed the button that made it freeze a few minutes of evidence at a time.
Tyree, you're first,
Alec said.
Please rise and recite the first of my heroic and intelligent deeds.
The girl who wore a vibrant violet dress stood so slowly I could have sworn winter came and ended by the time she did. She stood a bit hunched forward.
A little over 50 years ago,
she said in a quiet, raspy voice that sounded like the last bit of breath she had,
Alec Badalux killed more members of the opposing force, the Rat Gang, in the Middleton War than anyone else in the Suburb Gang, becoming the greatest warrior in Middleton's history.
That's correct.
Alec beamed and turned to the woman in the yellow dress who sat at the table next to her.
Your turn, Obelia.
She rose just as slowly as Terry and spoke in the same strained voice.
Because the Suburb Gang lost its leader in a raid during the war, the great Alec Badalux was brave and wise enough to demand, as Middleton's greatest warrior, to fill the spot, which the suburb gang readily allowed. Judging by how huge and fierce Alec was, even at 67 years old, it was tough to imagine anyone daring to go against him, not to mention because of his awful temper. Must have been a beast of a fighter. Alec's smile grew even deeper. Had to have been pretty proud of himself.
"Jail 'em, go ahead."
A large boy, though not nearly as big as Alec, who sat at the table on the other side of Obelia, stood in the same weary way his sisters had.
"The great Alex Badalux then gathered together all of Middleton's books,"
he said in a voice as weak and low as theirs. I winced. Precious power. Please don't let me ever be in these kids' conditions. I'll hang myself if I have to.
And in his exhaustive research, he discovered a means of generating power by using wind turbines.
Alec nodded, his face more smile than flesh. Wind turbines? What were those? Then the tall pole-like objects flashed into my mind, the ones that had the slowly turning triangle of rods towards the top of them. They'd line the roofs of the mansion in funnel-shaped structure. Those had to be the wind turbines. They obviously used wind anyway, and those were the only two buildings I knew of that had power. Alec stopped pacing in front of the last of the current ruler's tables.
"Sturge?"
Sturge rose even more shakily than the others. As much pain as he and his siblings were obviously in, there was no way I could feel bad for them, not when they'd lived a lie all their lives, and were about to be administered the cure when no one else in Middleton got to be. The idea still made me sicker than I'd ever been in my life, and I'd had the plague for almost 17 years.
"Lastly," Sturge said, "using the turbines, the great Alec Badalux powered the building in rural Middleton, and discovered not only that it was an old-world government laboratory disguised as a power plant, that it housed the cure to the plague."
Holy mother of power! So that was how it worked. The funnel-shaped building had been made to look like a power plant, but it was really a government lab in disguise. No matter what started the plague, the government had obviously worked hard to make a cure for it. I didn't know what was crazier, the fact that it actually succeeded but couldn't get the cure to the citizens of the old world before the disease swept it, or that the government put the lab that housed the cure right here in Middleton, of all places. Then again, the last part made sense. Since Middleton was a large town, nobody would be suspicious of a big building, and the town was pretty isolated in this huge old-world state of Pennsylvania. Nobody would have guessed such a top-secret lab was here. I kept staring straight ahead, the camera trained on the ceremony as it all sunk in.
"As is tradition,"
Alex said,
"the previous generation of rulers have retrieved the cure from the laboratory and will now administer it to the current generation."
He gestured toward one of the tables of adults, and all four of them rose, 1 man and 3 women. The man was the black-haired, broad-chested guy Stasha and I had seen at the lab, the one who'd carried the briefcase when he left the building. Baldur. I glanced at Stasha. Maybe we should leave now. No doubt we had more than enough proof, but she shook her head and looked back down. I had to agree. I couldn't rip my gaze from the ceremony now. I had to see the cure in action. The last generation of rulers walked up to Alec, who handed Baldur the briefcase. Alec took his seat at his now empty table while Baldur opened the case. 4 vials filled with some milky white substance sat inside, just what you'd expect to come from a laboratory. He handed one to each of the 3 women, took one himself, and each of them walked up to the current rulers. They popped the corks from the vials, and they handed the containers to the incredibly dark gray-skinned kids. The current rulers' hands shook as they lifted the vials to their mouths. It seemed like they'd die on the spot if the cure didn't reach their lips in the next 2 seconds. Please die, please die, please die. As awful as they were, the words kept racing through my head because of how corrupt the rulers were. The kids downed the contents of the vials, and the banquet hall went completely silent. A second later, the gray on the current rulers' faces and bare arms started to grow lighter, and kept growing lighter at a real fast pace. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Whispers broke out. Within seconds, the rulers' faces were completely pale, the original complexion of their skin, probably, and their features became defined rather than masses of blotches. Then each ruler popped into a straight posture, as if somebody just snapped their spines into the right spot. Each snap made me shudder. It was so incredible, and also so incredibly unfair. The adults clapped. A couple even hooted.
"Impeccable,"
Stasha murmured. All I could do was nod. Good thing I captured the stuff with the camera. Definitely convincing evidence. Alex stood again.
Now that the ceremony has officially ended, it is time you all embark to the library for the daily study session. You may return to your former entertainment when you have adequately grown your minds.
Everybody groaned, including the adults.
Remember,
Alex's booming, deep voice drowned out the groans.
You can be the most talented or even the most physically imposing person in the world, but at the end of the day, only the truly intelligent gain respect.
His statement had such a resonant, practiced quality to it. I wouldn't be surprised if he said it to everybody every day like some kind of mantra. I think it's safe to say it's time to go, I said. Agreed, Stasha said. I turned off the camera, stuffed it into my pocket, and Stasha and I crawled across the hall back to the propped open door we'd come through. We stood. I pushed the fire poker back down a bit so it rested more naturally against my side, and went into the entrance room. Pain stabbed through my foot again, so I had to limp.
"No way!"
A familiar razor blade voice cut through the area. Had to belong to the short, mousy girl who guarded the banquet hall doors with the pudgy boy. Both were out of view below the balcony we stood on.
"Just a few minutes ago we saw 2 toilet cleaners who looked just like that."
My heart skipped a beat as I grabbed Stasha's arm.